Yeah. I now looking back, I think I probably started the process of this book like I don't even know, like 15 years ago. I've always loved Advent, but so I started putting together Advent studies for people because anything I'm passionate about, I'm going to try to get everyone I know to do it. So I had a blog Advent study where like people would post their own stuff on their own blog and we'd link it all together. It was like back in the heyday of blogs. Do you remember that? Those were some times. And so from then on, I've loved it. So even on ITH, I put together a little Advent series. And so it's something that I've always absolutely loved. But what brought about this book was actually as my time here on Into the Harvest ended, I really felt like the Lord was saying, like, I think you have some more writing to do. So I was just what I tell everyone who ever feels like God's telling them to write is you just start writing and you don't really know what's going to happen. And maybe nothing. Maybe it's just for you. Maybe it's just for, your spouse or your kids. So I really just started writing in general, and it wasn't even necessarily about Advent. But then our community here was really in need of a Bible study. So my women's Bible study leader, like overarching all the little Bible studies, came to me and was like, our Christmas study is not coming in the mail. Thank you, Germany. And we were like, oh no, what do we do? And I was like, I think I can do something. And so I actually wrote a study, an Advent study, in like a very stupid amount of time, like 1 month, and where it was all I did. And so my poor family definitely suffered, but I was like all in, and I really need a good deadline. Like that's the real key, and like a need. So that was actually super cool and super challenging because I think as many of the people listening, we can get in our little Christian bubble and our Christian words, and even the word Advent is a very Christian-y word. Unless you're just really familiar with good chocolate Advent calendars, you don't really know even what that means. And so I was challenged by this group of women who many of them or did not know, had not read the Bible, like didn't know anything. So it was really, really fun to write something that would invite people in to this idea of Christmas as a celebration of something that God had in his mind from the very beginning of time and then told us about over time. And then it came about just as he said it would. And then how that points us to Jesus coming back again. So all those things, super passionate about. And then it became the challenge was, how do I put this in language that anyone, anywhere could pick up and find useful and find challenging and all the things. And so I did that study in like a month's time. So you can imagine it was a hot mess. And then I got all the feedback from the ladies. And it was then that I really started to think, there really isn't anything like this that mostly when you go on, even on Amazon or in your Christian bookstore, there are going to be Advent studies. Usually they go exactly through Christmas Day, and they usually have a lot of very Christian language, or they'll be on this one section, or just on Luke 2, or just on the Old Testament. They seem to have like picked their little niche. So I took on this huge challenge of trying to make it into something that could be used year after year that was kind of all encompassing to the season. So that's what happened.
Into the Harvest, friends. It's great to be back with you on another podcast. I have an awesome opportunity where I get to host Andrew and Abigail. Many of you know her as a part of our show from the very, very beginning, partnering with Andrew on Into the Harvest, partnering with us. She's a blogger, a writer. She is just a lover of people, a very gifted person. So we're actually really excited, Abigail, to have you on the show with us today because anytime we get a chance to talk about you, we know you're going to talk about Jesus. We know you're going to be a lot of fun. Though you'll bring a lot of energy. So welcome to the show. We're glad you're here, Abigail.
I am very excited to be back. It's been almost exactly 2 years. I went back and looked. So here I am.
Wow, 2 years, Andrew. I had no idea it's been 2 years. That's crazy.
No, life moves way too fast. I can't
Really
believe it has
fast.
been 2 years. I would have guessed a little over a year, so that is amazing. But
I know.
a lot of our audience will remember that you are an OG. You were here from the beginning with Into the Harvest, and like John said, really brought you on to run our blog, which you did for years, and then you got finagled into doing the podcast as well, which wasn't your favorite, but here you are. You're back. It must
I'm
not have
back.
been too bad.
I know, at my own accord, so it really wasn't too bad. And yes, I've missed you guys for sure. And it's been the most fun getting to be a consumer of Into the Harvest for the last 2 years, and just getting to listen to you guys in my little headphones every week. I have to tell you, it's gotten way better since I left. So that's pretty cool. It's always good when you leave and things just get better. So
You
yeah.
know that could be though. Like whenever you're on something, I think you listen to it with a different set of ears or just a more critical. So who knows? Maybe it's gotten better, but it's definitely great to have you back and already like just the laughs, the good times. But we need a little bit of an update because 2 years, I'm sure a lot has happened for you. Why don't you catch people up on what the latest is for you and your family?
Well, we are still living in Germany, so that has not changed since I left ITH. So just the challenges of being an American living in a foreign country where I do not speak the language. Still don't speak German, sad to say. Just terrible at it. They just respond in English, so we just chat in English together. But yeah, just really doing the mom thing for the most part. All my kids are just continually getting older, and just very much in the deep depths of middle school. So many prayers for that. And then I think probably the biggest thing since leaving ITH, I really went all in on Bible study leading. And so I've been doing that pretty much consistently until this year when my book really took a major, had to crunch time, all the last minute deadlines that I had. I've been leading pretty consistent Bible studies, and that's probably been the most fun thing that I've been doing since leaving this team. So, and that probably led to the book. So, spoiler, that's why I'm here. You guys did not say why I was here. I'm here to talk about my book.
Yeah, we were gonna get there. You just kind of like
Oh,
jumped the
okay.
gun on us.
Sorry.
Like, yeah, no,
I'm
sorry.
interviewing myself. It's fine.
Well, you're crushing it, Andrew. It's like we should want to go get a cup of coffee.
No, no, no. I need you.
Well, we had, I think, just by way of catch up, we got a chance to hang out in August. Had a couple guys. We traveled over to Europe with my son Jonathan and a couple of the guys from the ministry here. And even the day we were leaving, there were folks in your home. You're living on a gal who was over, had her kids over. There's some incidents that went down at this kid's school, and you're living on one of the kids that from your kid's school, and so you're still continuing to engage very much so in the harvest. We talked quite a bit about what's it look like to partner with other kingdom elements and how can we be faithful to our vision, but also be a part of partnering with other parts of the kingdom. And so it was really cool just to see you and Brett and have a chance just to talk about some of your key folks and what you guys are learning and the church that's kind of exploding in your house. And it was fun. I don't know if you remember this, but we were talking about, well, we've always kind of just been able, this is your and Brett's church in your home. We've always kind of been able to just like, okay, once the house is full, it just kind of stops growing. Like, well, now it's full and it's continuing to grow and we don't know what to do. So I don't know if that's changed, but just by way of like introducing you to our folks and kind of helping people catch up with you. Brett and Abigail are great lovers of people. They want to see church done well in such a way that honors and glorifies God. It's a kingdom element. It's a kingdom family. And that's exactly what you were doing when you were with ITH. That's exactly what you're doing now. So that's super cool to see you guys continue to walk with the Lord. And regardless of season, regardless of country, regardless of swim meets and soccer games and whatever else is going on and homeschooling, keeping the main thing the main thing. So Abigail, it was encouraging for me to see you guys and just have the chance to fellowship, and for our folks to see you guys being faithful to minister in this season, kind of being a Texan living in Germany. So
Thanks, John. It was really fun to have you guys there. I don't know if you guys feel this way when you have just a visitor into your life. You start to see your life from the outside. Like, this is crazy. Like, there's just always people here, and like, we must look truly insane from the outside. But but you guys know better than most what just doing like life is ministry, and so it's gonna always look a little crazy. But yeah, you guys definitely just. It was the first day of school, I think, and it's kind of coming back to me now. Yeah, it was fun, but it was just so great to just be like, yeah, guys, we've got some beds upstairs you can sleep in, and we will be terrible hosts, but absolutely come in.
not true, not true at all. Yeah, no, it was just really good to be with
Yeah,
you. So, like you said, we're here to talk about your book. We want to really introduce our folks. It's kind of crazy, like Keith wrote a book this year.
I
We finished
know.
we finished 3 books, the
I
Pathway series.
know,
You've
man.
written a book. It's been, I guess this is the year for like everything ITH to publish, I guess. So,
I know. It's
um,
so cool.
yeah, it's pretty awesome. I know this is not your first book, but it is like, I just feel like it's so daunting to sit down and think through, okay, what is it I'm trying to communicate? How do I communicate it? But really, I think probably the biggest stretch for me is kind of being motivated enough to actually sit down and write it. So, Andrew and I, we really wanted to start with that question. Like, what motivated you to write this particular book, An Invitation to Christmas? What's behind the title? Like, kind of what motivated you to do that?
Yeah. I now looking back, I think I probably started the process of this book like I don't even know, like 15 years ago. I've always loved Advent. But so I started putting together Advent studies for people because anything I'm passionate about, I'm going to try to get everyone I know to do it. So I had a blog Advent study where like people would, post their own stuff on their own blog and we'd link it all together. It was like back in the heyday of blogs. Do you remember that? Those were some times. And so from then on, I've loved it. So even on ITH, I put together a little Advent series. And so it's something that I've always absolutely loved. But what brought about this book was actually as my time here on Into the Harvest ended, I really felt like the Lord was saying, like, I think you have some more writing to do. So I was just, what I tell everyone who ever feels like God's telling them to write is you just start writing and you don't really know what's going to happen. And maybe nothing, maybe it's just for you, maybe it's just for your spouse or your kids. So I really just started writing in general, and it wasn't even necessarily about Advent. But then our community here was really in need of a Bible study. So my women's Bible study leader, like overarching all the little Bible studies, came to me and was like, our Christmas study is not coming in the mail. Thank you, Germany. And we were like, oh no, what do we do? And I was like, I think I can do something. And so I actually wrote a study, an Advent study, in like a very stupid amount of time, like 1 month, and where it was all I did. And so my poor family definitely suffered, but I was like all in, and I really need a good deadline. Like that's the real key, and like a need. So that was actually super cool and super challenging because I think as many of the people listening, we can get in our little Christian bubble and our Christian words, and even the word Advent is a very Christian-y word. Unless you're just really familiar with good chocolate Advent calendars, you don't really know even what that means. And so I was challenged by this group of women who many of them did not know, had not read the Bible, like didn't know anything. So it was really, really fun to write something that would invite people in to this idea of Christmas as a celebration of something that God had in his mind from the very beginning of time and then told us about over time. And then it came about just as he said it would. And then how that points us to Jesus coming back again. So all those things, super passionate about. And then it became very, the challenge was, how do I put this in language that anyone, anywhere could pick up and find useful and find challenging and all the things. And so I did that study in like a month's time. So you can imagine it was a hot mess. And then I got all the feedback from the ladies. And it was then that I really started to think, there really isn't anything like this that, mostly when you go on, even on Amazon or in your Christian bookstore, there are going to be Advent studies. Usually they go exactly through Christmas Day, and they usually have a lot of very Christian language, or they'll be on this one section, or just on Luke 2, or just on the Old Testament. They seem to have like picked their little niche. So I took on this huge challenge of trying to make it into something that could be used year after year that was kind of all encompassing to the season. So that's what happened.
Well, I love how the Lord works. I mean, even hearing your update on what's going on in life, and then how this resource came about. What stands out to me is just your faithfulness to the Lord, to be in the harvest, to be sharing your faith, to be walking alongside others. And then out of that, God brings things like this book, which you didn't really sit down and decide to write, but it was a response to a real need with real people. And I think that's how the Lord often works in our lives. Like he takes the way he's designed us and gifted us. And then when we're serving him and walking alongside him, things like this come out of it. You're right. I think we've done something along the lines of Advent really for the last several years. And even last year, Abigail, I don't know if you caught it, but I had Heidi White on, and she talked about Advent, and she's from more of a high church background. So it was kind of from that perspective, which was really neat. But I like with this resource that you've put together, it's available on Amazon right now. Folks can pick that up. But it's really, that's the thing that stood out to me, is that it's very accessible. I don't really like that word because it gets used a lot. But what I mean is, like, it is very easy to enter into. Like, it's a great entry point, not just to Advent, but to the Christ-centered life, which I think Christmas is a great entry point to the story of Christ and everything that it means, not just his coming on that first Christmas, but why he came, what it means for us now, how it should be changing our lives, the other 11 months of the year. But there probably are a lot of folks who are not as familiar with Advent. I certainly wasn't until my mid-30s. So, even if you've grown up around the Bible and church, tell us a little bit about Advent, not so much the word, but this idea of a season. We're all familiar with Christmas Day, but tell us a little bit more about just the idea of Advent and how this resource can help folks.
Yeah, well, I definitely started out writing an Advent study. So, Advent meaning the coming of, or waiting on the coming of a king. And it kind of transitioned to what this book is called, which is a December devotional, which is definitely a nod to ITH, because thank you for alliteration forever. But I I realized that I actually was doing a talk. And so when I was starting to do this talk, and so that had nothing to do with the book, but I was, going to be sharing some of the things I was writing about in the book. And so my first thought was like, okay, first I need to explain to these women what Advent is, that it's not just a box of chocolates. And so I was really challenged, because I think, as we all kind of do, we want to start with the biblical foundation of something. Well, Advent is not in the Bible. So then I was stuck in a hard place. I know. So I was like, well, where do we go from here? And so it's okay. Like, it's fine that, church has come up with a good word. That's great. And I love that. But I did not want to spend all of my time just explaining what Advent was or why the church came up with Advent. And so instead, we can go back all the way to our Bibles and see that from the very beginning, God has been creating seasons and days of the week, different times for us as his children to spend time with him and remember what he's done and think about what he's going to do and praise him and worship him and also lament and fast. And so he's built all of that into the word of God and to his instruction for us and what he's given us because he loves us and knows how our little brains work. So that was a lot more accessible to me and also a lot more biblical. So in my mind, it's okay for us to have a calendar or like a church calendar even where we have certain days that we do things. And that's good for our little brains to have like, oh yes, it is now time for me to think about Jesus dying on the cross. Or, oh yes, it's time for me to think about Jesus, being born. So that was kind of the basis that I wanted to work from, which was that every year December rolls around and we get this day where, it's this big holiday, but it also, we do think more about Jesus's birth. And so how could we intentionally spend our month and maybe a little different, maybe a little outside of our normal daily routine of quiet times and add something in that's going to spark something new. And so for me, that's why I always loved Advent, is that I always loved this excuse to go over this beautiful story that God did for us. And so I wanted that for my readers as well, was a time where we could kind of look back and see how the whole Old Testament is just pointing to Jesus, and not just to Jesus and what he would do for us ultimately, but even like super specific about where he was going to be born and how that was going to all play out. And a lot of people that I was sharing with didn't know all those tiny little details. And I even learned new ones as I was researching for this book. So that was super, super fun. And then spending just some quality time with each one of the people that's kind of the characters, the cast of characters around Jesus's birth and what they can teach us about how we should behave and how our characters should be. And so it was really fun to imagine people sitting down with this and getting to hopefully year after year having new things pop out of them. So
Yeah, it's so good, Abigail. I think you've captured two things very well. One is to get our focus back on Jesus and recognize why God set up things the way he did. But to do that with language that invites every person into the conversation. And as believers and folks who have walked with Jesus for years, I don't think we realize how difficult that really is, or actually how we really do speak a different language than most people around us. So I love that you actually point this out, like right from the very, very beginning in your invitation. You actually kind of poke fun at yourself. You say, one thing that sticks out from all my nerdy studies is starting way back when the Lord told his people to honor the Sabbath. God knew his people well. He knew how we learn. He knew how we best connect to him. So from the beginning and his first connection with his people, God knew we needed a time and a season for everything. And so that's one of those great backdrops of this book. And, as you sat down for this December devotional, and you invite people to think about Christ and Christmas and what's true in this season. But then I think you really explicitly say what you want the book to do, which I love. The greatest goal is that you come away from this holiday season with your eyes fixed more on Jesus and less on the busyness of life. We actually just talked about that before we jumped on, So, hey, how's it going? Or you got more gray hairs than you used to? You got kids going there's probably plays going on right now. You got this thing going on, and then swim practice and whatever else. And then you say this: I hope this book not only brings you to a deeper personal relationship with Jesus, but is also simple enough to share with friends, kids, and anyone else who wants to join in for a day or the whole month. So I really love that, written in such a way that everybody can take it in, and kind of moving away from maybe some of these big words that might actually become a barrier to folks actually connecting with Jesus. And for us as believers to be able to invite everybody into that, even if they'll just over for dinner and that's the time we sit down with our family and we do our reading for that day, they get a chance just to see that. So I'm really excited for our readers to have it. So go ahead, Abigail.
Yeah, I think too, um I personally love a good like do this on December 2nd, do this on December 3rd. Like I love a checklist, like that is my jam. But I know there are people that it then stresses them out if they miss a day. And so I also had in the back of my mind like, okay, if this I'm really in I'm long gaming you here. Like I would love to have this be a part of every Christmas. That way you could think to yourself, well, I missed December 8th, but I'll probably hit it around next year. Like in a good 5 years, I'm going to hit all days of December devotion. You know, in reality, this is maybe one of the craziest seasons of everyone's lives. So, and I wanted it to be something where it really was an invitation that maybe some days you're like, I'm sorry, I'm RSVPing no on today.
Yeah, exactly. Or you wake up the next day and you realize, oh, we didn't even do that yesterday,
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
very common. Yeah. Good.
for
So,
sure.
so kind of what motivated you was there was just a really practical need. Now, I love that about being an everyday laborer, an everyday person trying to meet the spiritual needs of the people around us is, hopefully we're thinking and respond. We're aware enough what the needs are, but then we allow God to help us respond as he leads and guides. So that's life in the harvest. That's how you do life in the harvest is, oh, there's a real need for real people here. So you didn't dream up a book just because you wanted to write another one and get some royalties, which I'm guessing isn't making you rich, right? So
Zero,
from your
no.
first book. Yeah. So instead there was a real need, the real people who had a real need, and God gave you real ideas, and you wrote those down. So I love that. So it really is this picture of faithfulness in the harvest. All right, so you've got 5 sections in this book. So let's actually talk about the book, okay, folks, like as you're thinking about this book, you're listening to this podcast, this isn't like the Clef Notes or your Spark Notes or your cheat code to whatever college class you're trying to take. We're actually trying to invite you to go buy the book. So we're not going to get deep into every page of this, right? So, but how about the format? Just enough to let people kind of be excited about kind of grabbing up the book and using this kind of as they journey through December. So you had 5 sections. I wrote those down as glorious anticipation,
Which we've
people,
already talked about. So
right?
that's like
Good.
the looking back at all those little like tiny breadcrumbs that God gives us throughout the Old Testament. Really tried to cover all the big ones, and then a couple of little ones that maybe people don't know as much about, of just really straight up prophecy about tiny details about how and when and where Jesus was going to be born. So yeah, that's the glory anticipation.
Yeah, there's some really cool things in there. Just some connections that you made that I had never seen before, and even as you like self-proclaimed nerd, you said it, I didn't say it. Even
Oh,
as you
totally.
like nerd out about Christmas, and this has been something that you love. At one point you
Yeah.
talk about, I love everything about Christmas, every single thing about Christmas. You were talking about how God showed you new things, so that's a cool part of this story too. So that's glorious anticipation. People of promise is kind of your second section. So as you break down this journey, people of promise, talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, this is something that you guys talk about here, of how you will often do Bible study with people when you're reading a story. You're like, okay, let's set the scene, let's get the characters, like, let's think about them. And that's often how we go into a Bible study. But this just gives us the opportunity to slow down, and each day we're taking a different little person and looking at their character, and why would God have picked this person to be Jesus's mother, Jesus's father, Jesus's aunt and uncle, his cousin, like all the people that surrounded Jesus's life? And then think, okay, well, God picked them for a reason. So are we similarly looking for these are the characteristics that we hold in high value, or maybe we don't, maybe we should. So it kind of allows us to just slow down just a little bit and really do kind of a under a microscope of each one of those key people.
Yeah, so these are really the supporting characters in the story of God bringing his son Jesus into the world. That, yes, we're focused on Jesus, but this second section really allows us to look at the people who were surrounding him in that first Christmas story.
Yeah, and it's funny too. Like one of the things I loved is how you connected that with us. So what you're saying is, do we value these characteristics or not? So that was really fun for me. So your third section is birth of a savior.
Yeah, so this is like our really the nativity play is coming in hot. We're getting into the story of how Jesus did in fact get born. Early Matthew and early Luke, we have the story play out. And so we just kind of take it back in chunks and really look at the details, connecting it back to what we saw in our prophecies and just really delighting in how it really did work out in that way. But I really was so delighted in when I was researching this and thinking a lot of like what I would want us to all think about as we go into a story that maybe is so familiar that we lose it because we just know what's coming next. So for me, even in this, which is an election year, not every year will be an election year, praise Jesus, but in a year where there's just a lot of, you know, stuff going on, I had to like, it was wonderful to be able to say, hey, look, God used the craziness of politicians to bring Mary and Joseph to Bethlehem. So things like that just brought a lot of comfort to me as I was looking at a story that I've known since I was, 3, and seeing how those details can really relate to our days and times that we currently live in. So that was really fun.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is, if you wake up sad, mad, or glad, or whatever it is on November the 6th, although we won't probably know the answer still by November the 6th, grab this book. It'll help, actually even help you remember the sovereignty of God, even over politicians. So that was a cool,
Yeah, I'm
just
sure
to
in
walk through that
December
passage.
this year we're gonna
We'll know.
still need this.
Oh yeah, we might know. I thought you were saying we might know by December.
Oh no, I don't think we
That's hilarious.
that's not a
Oh,
prophecy. I don't know.
yeah, that's awesome. Fair enough. Well, I'm supposed to test everything, so even if it was, we'll
Oh,
test that
right, right,
prophecy.
right.
Yes. Um, this then worship of a king. This is probably something that for me is almost trivialized, where worship is this kind of thing we would do like once a week, or this idea of how do we really, in a reflective way, with all of the gravity of this situation in mind, with how marvelous this situation is, how do we truly worship, this king? So that was fun for me too, as I read through there, and as you're making just thoughts about the angels and light and darkness and all these things that happened in that section. That it was just a lot of fun for me. I think will be fun for the readers as they trying to think about worshiping in a new way, in a holistic way, a full way. So that was a cool section there. Andrew, did you have any thoughts on that particular part of like worship of a king?
I think the thing that stood out to me, we've already touched on it a little bit, but just what the challenge that we face in life is to stay centered on Jesus and to not only see him clearly, but then respond appropriately. And that sort of is the basis of worship, is to recognize Jesus for who he truly is, and then to reorient our lives in such a way that shows that we have that recognition. And then the idea that we need seasons. We've talked about this. I think that modern life just naturally works against that, even with things like technology, which we don't even think about because we've always lived in this world where we can flip a switch and we have rooms full of light, at midnight. The idea of rhythm that I do think God has built into the nature of our world, but I don't know that it's necessarily a sign of the brokenness of humanity, but how easily we get out of step with God's way of communicating himself to us. And so this opportunity that you're providing, Abigail, to kind of take a step back and say, no, God has designed us where we need seasons of celebration, seasons of remembrance, seasons of lament. And the Christmas season, or Advent, if we take that opportunity to recenter ourselves on Jesus so that we can see him clearly as a king and then worship him appropriately. I think that was one of the highlights for me of the book. Well, two of the highlights. One is that it recognizes the need for us to have rhythm and seasons if we're going to become the people God has called us to and live this life well. And then that it is all centered on Jesus, from start to finish. The third thing that really stood out to me is just it's very practical. I think the way you've designed each day of the devotion is to help us focus on a certain part of the Christmas story or a certain aspect of the life of Christ, but then figure out, well, how does that actually play out in our lives in a practical way? So maybe if you don't mind sharing a little bit about why you wrote it that way. And I want folks, I know they don't have a copy of the book, but each day, I mean, it probably takes 5 to 10 minutes to work through. What
Oh
would you
yeah,
say?
I would think less. I
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't timed it.
So, so the value I think is that it's not so much that you're spending 2 hours one day really doing a deep dive. The value I think is that each day you're bringing yourself back to the story of Jesus and you're looking at it with fresh eyes.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it is an invitation, right? So you can stay as long as you want, but you can also just, get what you need and get out. But I think actually this section, the worship of a king, was probably the easiest to write. After each little devotional, I asked questions that hopefully people will answer, either like write them out or talk to other people about them. But this section was actually the easiest because these were people who were responding to Jesus's birth. And so we had the angels right away, like not even like waiting a second before finding someone to tell this exciting news to, and it being a bunch of shepherds, which is super encouraging to us as just lowly, not super awesome people ourselves. Like, okay, I'm like probably on a shepherd level. So, just like, and then knowing that those shepherds, we were immediately sharing that with their community and how that news must have spread. And so those are things that, it doesn't take a super smart person to see how that, relates to our day, of how we all have an encounter with Jesus at some point that we can share. That is ours. And no one else can, respond to it other than, wow, okay, like if that happened to you. So kind of those challenges were sort of easy in this section because this is how the shepherds and the wise men and Zacharias and Anna, how they all responded to this incredible birth of this baby, are each one very different, but each one of them are things that you and I can all do and add to our lives, or think, man, am I doing that? Am I becoming an evangelist at the age of 80? Like this was a fun section for sure, as far as how it very much relates to our right now and how we can be doing this.
Yeah, it's so good. And in this last section, I felt kind of really carries the whole idea of keeping Jesus at the focus. So we toyed with the idea of maybe titling this whole episode "Keeping Christ in Christmas." It is cliche, but this is exactly what we're trying to do in terms of what this book is about. So this idea of purposeful pause was the last section, and I loved you taking. So almost always this idea of a Christmas devotional Advent is like, okay, Christmas happened, bam, we're done, we're moving on. But what you did instead was to say, okay, everything changes now. Everything has to change because of the birth of a Savior. Everything has to change because of the birth of our King. He's whom we follow. What's next? Everything has changed. What are the implications that come next? So I love this purposeful pause because it helps. So often people, particularly people like me, it's just get up tomorrow and do what you did yesterday today, and you'll do the same thing tomorrow. But what this section did was to say, okay, everything's changed. We have a King. We have a Savior. What's next? What does he require of us? So that was really fun and I'll actually quote we're going to kind of talk about our favorite parts of the book here next, but I'll quote one of those, applications that you had from the Purposeful Pause week, just to be thinking about, well, what's next? So that's a little different. Did you feel like God gave you that idea in terms of like thinking through what's next and not just kind of like full stop moment? Okay, Jesus is here. We're good.
Behind the curtain, you guys, this book was at the editors and they came back with the edits, and I had to ask permission to add this week because I came up with it while it was at the editors. So it was like very last minute, but I really did think, I just named my book a December devotional and I'm not even doing the last 5 or 6 days. That's just not accurate title. So then it was very, when I got permission to add a whole nother week, my immediate response was then the fear of like, how was I gonna write another 7? But it actually was so cool and so much fun how honestly all of those things that I talk about in that week are very practical tools that I do every year in that little space between Christmas and New Year's anyway. And so I just got to share them in one little spot of, looking back at the last year, reminding ourselves what God has done, and really seeing Him having already been so faithful to us. And then how are we going to move forward as followers of Jesus in a more purposeful way in this new year? And so it was actually, I think I scared everyone and stressed everyone out by just adding a whole new section, but I really think it was worth it. Because it is like the most awkward year, like week of the whole year, in my opinion. Like no one knows what day it is on any of those days. So if you use this book in any way, shape, or form, it will at least remind you what day of the week it is. And I think that's a value in itself.
That's awesome. Yeah, exactly. So true. Everybody's on vacation. Everything's out of sorts.
Yeah. Well,
no
even
school,
if you
no
are
work.
not on vacation, your kids are, and that's even worse. Honestly.
Even crazier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So true. So true. Well, I told you that I had written some down in our notes. That some of my favorite parts was that it felt I didn't write this in the notes, so I do want to make this point. I think it's really important that Andrew and I just finished up a study on 1 Thessalonians where we're walking through the text together. And one of the things we try and remind people is that we're going to read those texts with a disciple-making focus as disciple makers. And this is probably the only Advent devotion, Christmas devotion I've ever read that has that same kind of bias. With a bias to generational ministry, with a bias to doing life the way Jesus did, with a bias to very practically thinking about sharing your faith. You talk about kind of having these moments where, hey, you're going to see people you don't always get to see. You have the opportunity for conversations that you very rarely have. How can you prepare now for those? So overarching, my favorite part of this devotional that you wrote is that it hits right at the heart of a disciple maker, which is let's keep Christ as our focus and do ministry the way He did in every season. So I love that. That's who you are, Abigail. That's who you and Brett are. You're disciple makers at heart in the harvest. So, so many of us, we're taking in, Christian thoughts, Christian ideas, but we don't always get it from that same perspective. So that was one of my favorite parts. So I just wanted to say thank you. I got to enjoy as I was reading through. Wow, thanks for like speaking to my heart in terms of my perspective on how I read the scriptures and think through even things like Christmas. So it was that was really fun for me.
Well, I hope I did so many of the people that have taught Brett and I over the years justice, because it was really cool how so many of the tools that we use in teaching, discipleship tools of evangelism or reading the Bible, or just all the different things that we are constantly teaching as disciple makers, I was able to just so like, it was God, obviously, that He could just fit them into this Christmas story so easily. Like, it was not forced at all. It was there, right? It's discipleship is in every part of our journey with Jesus. So it was not difficult, but it was really fun to be able to put it all kind of in one spot. So honestly, if you do this whole month, like you're going to get all of the things that like I usually teach people how to do, over a longer period of time. So have fun with that, everybody.
Okay. Talking about a shortcut here? I don't know if there's any shortcuts in the kingdom.
No.
Yeah, no.
Just fine. Like a open fire hose type situation.
Yeah, exactly. Boosh. Take it all.
Yeah,
right.
There you go. All in December, no problem.
Yeah.
That's one of the cool things about resources like this is it really is the culmination of years of following Jesus and trying to share Him with others. And then you get this opportunity to just glean from those years of experience and the people that have shared with you. And now we have in one spot this resource that we can walk through during the month of December. One of the ways, Abigail, I've been thinking about discipleship and disciple making is alliteration, finding Jesus and then focusing your life around Him. that's really discipleship, is just finding Jesus and then focusing your life around him. And disciple making is helping others find Jesus and then reorient, focus their lives around him. And I think this is just a great tool to help us do that during this specific season of the year. It puts the focus on Jesus, but it also gives us practical ways to focus our lives around him, not just in December, but like John was just sharing that last week, and really throughout, ways that we can continue to focus on him and share him with others. This podcast is coming out on Thanksgiving Day. Last week, Shelton and I had a conversation about gratitude, and that's been one of the things that has stood out to me with gratitude. Psalm 145 talks about when we take the time to recognize God and the work that he's done in our lives and in the world, it fills us with a sense of gratitude. We begin to declare that, and then that actually changes the world. It changes the world around us. It changes other people's perspective on life. And I really see something similar here with this season of Advent. It's an opportunity to pause and take stock of what God has done, what he's revealed about himself. And then when we respond to that, it not only changes us, but it does give us, it makes us change agents in the lives of the people that we're around. And like you mentioned in the book there, that this is one of the seasons of the year where we're probably going to see people that we don't always get to see, whether that's family or friends. It's a time of gathering. So if we come into those conversations and those gatherings having spent time with Jesus and having that perspective, it's going to have a positive influence in pointing people towards him.
For sure. I mean, it ends our year too, which I just think we by nature become self-reflective on the whole year prior, so hopefully it's just bringing back how the last year went, right? And how we hope to see the Lord and his faithfulness in this coming season. And I think probably something we haven't really talked about yet, but is maybe one of the most important things, is the season of Advent is also an invitation to our waiting on Jesus's return, like period, like big stop, like the future one. So I think that is maybe the most encouraging, but also the most like, the time is a ticking. Like, how are we sharing this good news with as many people as possible? Because in the same way that he came so perfectly, and we have so much just picture of how God just fulfilled scripture all the way through, he has also told us very specifically that he is coming back, and we can wait on that with that same anticipation and knowing he is good to his word. And so it's really encouraging to my heart as I enter into a season where I'm thinking about his birth and how just so fit perfectly together, that he is going to do that again. And I want to be ready. I want to have an attitude of my eyes on Jesus, so that my eyes are already there. And so him showing up is hopefully just like the glorious moment that we're all waiting for. So
Yeah, we just talked about that in First Thessalonians. Like, one of the questions we ask is, what would be missing if this book's not in there? And it just seemed like there's so many implications of Paul talking about the return of Christ that people actually stopped working. They were so excited about it.
No, I love that part.
It's kind of crazy.
No, you still need to pay your bills.
Yeah, seriously, like, seriously, it's very proud. So I do think this is something that we may lose, Abigail, and just like everyday parts of life is, Jesus is returning. He is coming back. Let's live in a way that shows we're ready for that, and that we're enjoying him, and we're also on mission with him. Yeah, I mentioned in my notes, Abigail, that I had written down some of my favorite things. And I think this might be helpful for readers, because you don't know what you're getting into when you get a book. So you know what I mean? Okay.
No, totally.
So first of all, I would recommend this book, and so would Andrew. So let's just get that out there first of all. So if you think anything about us, that's we would give 2 thumbs up. But I thought it was funny. It was reflective. It helped people like emote and deal with their emotions. It was emotional, and it was missional. And that's actually hard to pull off in one space. You go from like the weird uncle as one of these kind of characters, people of promise, the weird uncle, which And then you go all the way, what? Yeah, exactly. And you go all the way through to, thinking through what are the implications. In fact, that was really my favorite part as you close the book is you just ask the questions in your time of reflection. What new season is on your horizon? And are you already entering into it? Are you an empty nester? Are your kids off to school? Has your job changed? And then you ask very insightfully, how can the Lord be your focus in the season you're in? And so often we don't do that purposefully. I think we use the word intentional way too often. There's been articles on that. Maybe you pointed that out to me. This intentionality is this buzzword that everybody uses, but are we doing things on purpose? So how can the Lord be your focus in the season of life you're in? What do you think the Lord is asking of you in your current season? If you aren't sure, take some time, think about it. So for me, that was kind of wrap up of this whole thing as you've been on this journey to recognize Jesus, the promises that said he was coming. This is how he did actually come. Here's how we can celebrate that. Here are the key characters and all of that. But let's let this change us from this point forward. So I love that. It was really fun. I laughed out loud. My kids thought I was weird as I'm like, they're on there like, it's like a couple different iterations, but they have like their little electronic time, like, oh, it's nice and quiet, so they got screen time and I pulled up your book on my Kindle. And so I really enjoyed it. So I just we wanted to give you the chance just to kind of give us some closing thoughts, some takeaways. And then Andrew will close us out from our time.
Well, those are very kind words, John. Thank you so much. It means a lot. This community has poured into me and built me in so many ways, and so it's kind of like taking. Or you're not my dad's because you're way too young for that, but it's like taking it to you guys and being like, "What do you think of what I did with all the things you've taught me?" So I really appreciate that. But even that. That last thought that you had is really kind of cool how that did relate to how this book came to be, because I left into the harvest and I left this job here and really wasn't sure what God had for me next. And I think when you have like this drive to be missional in our mindset, there often are seasons where there doesn't feel like there's anything. And I just want to encourage people who are listening that I really, spoiler alert, nothing happened for like a year after I left into the harvest. So, but God was doing things. I was leading Bible studies and starting to see the need for things and, take note in what he was teaching me. So every season has its value. And some just seem like they're giving off more and like are more productive and sound cooler. Writing a book sounds cooler than, being a mom. But honestly, the being a mom probably has more kingdom value. And so this is truly the culmination of an odd season of obedience. And so I just will say that when we are just trying to be obedient, the Lord is going to use it in some way, and even if it's just this little book. So I hope that people will enjoy it and that it really just invites them into what the Holy Spirit wants to speak to them about. It was pretty cool that one of my editors, she is not really, I think she's a Catholic actually, but it was cool because she was my copy editor, so she was doing grammar stuff, but she would write little notes out to the side. And so it was interesting even to see what stuck out to her and what she really resonated with. And so my heart is that the Holy Spirit will do the work on any given day, and he'll take my words and turn them into something good, even if they're not there. So that is what I'm most excited about, is that we can all go into this season with an intentionality of letting the Lord do the work that he's going to do. And I'm just excited to see what that's going to be. So thanks for letting me come and chat with you guys. This was so fun.
Yeah, very, very well said, Abigail. John and I had a chance to preview the book this past week. But not only do we recommend it, I think both John and I are going to be able to do more of a deep dive and experience it, actually use it this December. So folks can get it on Amazon. We've got links to that in the show notes here. If you're listening on a podcast app, it'll be in the notes. If you're on YouTube, it'll be in the video description. would definitely encourage people to check that out, so that this season leading up to Christmas is a time when you really can turn your attention to the whole story of Christmas, Jesus being the centerpiece, and then reorient your life around him. So, Abigail, I can't believe it's been 2 years. No way are you going to get away with another 2-year break on the
don't
podcast.
forget about it. Yep. Coming back sooner than that.
It's always great to talk to you and to have you on the podcast, and really appreciate you coming on and writing this book. So I know the Lord's going to use it and cause it to be a resource that helps people find him and focus on him. So thank you for doing it.
Thanks, you guys. You're the best.